I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, a financial planner for Mance Wealth Management, Landon Mance.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Danica. Again, my name is Landon Mance, and I'm a financial planner, and the practice that I operate under is Mance Wealth Management, and I've got my colleague on the call, and his name is Brett Jensen, and he is a financial planner based out of Utah. And Brett and I collaborate and do some joint work together, so that's kind of why we're presenting together as a team. So you're going to notice that you'll see the Mance Wealth Management logo, and you're also going to notice that you'll see Lincoln on here. So Brett and I both operate under the umbrella, which is Lincoln Financial Advisors. That is our broker-dealer that we partner with to conduct our businesses. So with that, today, Brett and I are going to be talking to you folks about business succession planning, and the topic of our workshop today is Don't Fail to Plan a Business Succession Workshop, primarily for family-owned and independently owned businesses. Let's go to the next slide. That's just a simple disclosure. Move past that to the next slide, please, Danica, to the agenda. All right, so let's review the agenda quickly. In just a moment, we're going to start by taking a big picture look at succession planning. Next, we have a very definite, philosophy about succession planning, and this involves the need to have a clear understanding of the planning priorities around business succession planning. And for that reason, we're also going to be discussing what we believe should be every business owner's first, second, and third planning priorities. Along these lines, we'll spend some time on a topic near and dear to all of us as business owners, how to get money out of the business. We'll also take a look at why choosing a successor can be, such a challenging thing to undertake, and offer some ideas how to make that process a little bit easier. So we'll make sure that we get everybody out of here on time, or as close to on time as we possibly can. Just a quick FYI for everybody, we have condensed about 60 to 90 minutes worth of content to about 25 to 30 minutes. So we're going to be moving through this pretty quickly. So we do kind of apologize for that ahead of time, because, we're going to be hitting you guys with a lot of good stuff, hopefully. But we encourage and invite anybody to ask questions at the end. And if we can't get your questions at the end, we're more than happy to set up a time for us to jump on a call together. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so our workshop objective, pretty straightforward here. It's intended to give you an overview of the issues involved in planning for the succession of your business. We'll be doing this by looking at some common succession planning problems and some of the possible solutions that you might want to consider. At the end of the workshop, you might be pleasantly surprised to discover that you're beyond some of the basics, and you might be looking for some more specific information about maybe something a little bit more complex, a manager buyout, an ESOP, something like that, and we're happy to have that conversation with you at a different time as well. So let's begin taking a look at the big picture. Next slide, please. All right, so small businesses are certainly a central part to our economy here in the United States, right? So we've got about 30 million small businesses in the U.S. that are employing, about half of the nation's private workforce. Yet only about 40% of these businesses are going to survive into the second generation, about 13% to the third, and a very dismal 3% are going to survive to the fourth, generation and beyond that. Next slide, please. All right, so why is this? And experts typically are going to cite three reasons, right? The first is going to be family conflict, right? So family conflict can occur between parents and children, or between, siblings. and can range from the, persistent quarreling about the best way to run the business to all-out power struggles, and we've seen everything in between that as well. So even though it's rarely going to go to blows, the combination of family and business certainly is going to bring in a unique set of challenges that you need to consider. And whenever you've got brothers and sisters, working together in the same business, the stage can certainly be set for a sibling rivalry, as we see depicted here in this cartoon. All right, next slide, please. All right, second big reason is the founder simply never bothered to put a plan in place for the transfer of that business. Only about 30% of business owners actually have a written succession plan. And I'll make the assumption that since you made the effort to be on this call today, that you intend to be one of the people that do have a plan. So pat yourself on the back for that, and which is certainly a wise decision to make, because as somebody once said, failing to plan is really planning to fail. Next slide, please. All right, a third reason businesses don't make it to future generations is federal estate taxes, right? So in 2018, the top federal marginal estate tax rate remains at about 40%. The federal estate tax gift and the exemptions have gone up significantly in 2018, essentially doubling. So for a single person, it's about $11.2 million, and for a married couple, it's about $22.5 million. But something to keep in mind is that these provisions are set to sunset in 2025. So therefore, 2026, it looks like we'll probably revert back to the 2017 levels, but we'll see what happens from there. So I'm going to pass it over to my partner here, and he's going to address how to approach this from a planning perspective. So go ahead and take it away, Brett.
Okay, great. Thanks, Landon. As planners, we basically approach succession planning from a unique perspective. We base our practices on the premise that there are three key planning priorities that should drive really your decision-making process. And in order of importance, they are on the slide here: providing for your own financial security, transferring the business, and then obviously trying to minimize the impact of taxes. So as we talk today about succession planning, we'll do so within the context of these three planning priorities. So let's begin with priority number one: providing for your personal financial security. Next slide. So when it comes to planning for the succession of your business, you should never take action without knowing the long-term impact of your personal financial situation. It's critical that you have concrete and clear information on how the various transfer options might affect you and your family, not only in the short term, but more importantly, 10, 20, 30 years from now. And as obvious as this may sound, when we first meet with clients, many are unaware of the long-term financial consequences of the current succession plan that they have in place or maybe have implemented 5 years ago. And they think that everything is all set when in fact they may have a problem and don't even know it. Next slide. And so really in thinking about your financial needs and objectives, you need to determine first how much money you and your family will need to maintain your desired lifestyle, making sure that you can live basically the rest of your life without fear of ever running out of money. And so step two in that process is taking a full, extensive inventory of all of your existing resources, including your business. And then third, you need to make sure that you understand to what extent and on what basis your existing resources will be adequate to meet those needs and objectives. And so really to get a clear picture of what this will look like for you, you'll want to consider doing some more complex modeling to better understand how different factors will impact your situation. Next slide. So also we mentioned earlier that many business owners postpone the succession planning for simple reason that they can't afford to get out of the business. So you see this graphic here of the dog doing the math that says we can't afford to keep the cat. So really the question is, how can you get income out of your business? Or in other words, how can you turn equity into cash? And there's two options. You can, really oversimplifying it, you can either sell the business, converting the business to cash, or you can keep the business and continue to derive income out of the business. And for some business owners, selling is an effective solution, and for others, keeping the business is the only way to really generate the income that they need. But it presents some other questions and challenges. So let's look more closely at how to get money out of your business. Next slide. This slide basically shows that, for those business owners who are ready to be done and exit the business, they simply sell the business and move to their favorite vacation spot and basically live on the proceeds of a partial or a complete sale. This option obviously assumes you can find a buyer at the time you plan to sell and also at the price that you want. The question you need to ask yourself is, how reasonable is it to find a buyer who wants to buy when you want to sell and at the price you believe is fair? And also that price is what you need to be financially secure, because it wouldn't make sense to sell your business if you're not going to get the amount that you need to be okay. So what would happen if you were also forced to sell today? So for example, because of a permanent disability, in that situation, finding a buyer is a little bit more challenging also when the sale is perceived as a forced or involuntary sale. So would you get the full price for your business in that situation? So for many, it's tough to predict the market for their business today, let alone, many years from now. And really the fact of the matter is many business owners don't have a choice but, to depend on the business for ongoing income. Currently been working with some clients that two business owners, they're 50-50% owner each. And it's a unique niche business. 2 years ago, they went through our comprehensive planning process, and we determined that they needed to net, after taxes, about $6 million from the sale of the business. And an investment bank that we engaged and went through a valuation process determined the value at that time was around $4 million. And so through some planning, some accounting adjustments, plus additional growth in their business, they're now on track to exit successfully in the next 3 to 5 years. But for the time being, they've decided we've got to keep the business and continue to take profits along the way and diversify from the being so dependent on the exit of the business. So next slide. This is another option is to keep the business and stay employed. And so if you're like many of the business owners that we work with, you might need to keep the company for a while and continue to produce the income that you'll need. And some ways to get money out of your business in this scenario is obviously you're drawing wages. So as you continue to be employed in your business, you're taking a salary and reasonable compensation. Plus then you layer in some benefits. There's the opportunity to layer in pension plans. There might be life and health coverage, maybe a non-qualified deferred compensation plan. Then you might also be taking dividends or distributions from your business. And again, most of those probably are flowing. It depends on the structure of your corporation, if it's a C Corp or an S Corp or LLC, how those dividends and distributions are treated. And then a lot of times our business owners might own the real estate that their business is housed in. And so they will charge rent back to the business, and they'll derive income from the business that way, paying for the real estate and paying themselves for that ownership of the real estate. The next slide, if we go to the next slide, shows a scenario where you're no longer employed. So you keep the business, and still retain ownership in some portion of the business, but you still have options for getting money out of the business in this situation. Owners can gradually sell stock to a successor on an installment basis, and this is particularly common arrangement in family businesses that we see. So again, you see that you can have lease payments or rent coming back to you from the company for any real estate that you might own, that the business is a part of. And another common arrangement is that you might stay on as a consultant and consult the new management team and be an advisor. You could be compensated for that. A lot of times individuals will draft up a non-compete agreement. And people sometimes ask, well, why is a non-compete agreement needed, especially if we're selling to our children, because it's unlikely you're going to turn around and go around the corner and set up shop and compete with your kids. But it's another form to simply get cash out of your business and still be within the IRS guidelines. Two other additional sources of income would be, again, we mentioned non-qualified plans, being able to defer money into that, and also a 401k plan, a qualified plan. You'll see the qualified plan is off to the right because in the instance that you're selling your business over time on installments, if the business ever failed, all of those other means of compensation would go away except for your qualified plan, which is going to be protected from that event. So again, that becomes a key part in planning, making sure that you've got enough resources. Next slide. So only after you've satisfied that you've sufficiently analyzed the long-term financial impact of your succession planning, you're then prepared to move on to the second planning priority, and that's to begin making decisions regarding the actual transfer of the business. Go to the next slide. There's three major considerations in transferring a business. On the human or personal side, you need to take a look at letting go, and that's primarily an emotional issue. Then you also have developing a successor, and that's more of a personnel issue. And so the process of actually choosing a transfer option is driven more by tax than necessarily emotional considerations. However, we've seen where we've got to kind of come to a happy medium between those. And so let's start by looking at what we mean by letting go. So next slide. So letting go, as we begin to develop the succession plan, there's several questions you need to ask yourself. When do I want to let go? How do I let go? So in other words, do I let go in small steps or all at once? And what are the obstacles that make it hard for me to let go? And really, before you can effectively answer the when and how, it's important to examine what obstacles you might have in handing over the reins. Some people do it cold turkey. They announce that they're leaving on a certain day and just basically turn the keys in and they don't look back. But others have a tougher time in leaving, and so they transfer the business gradually over a period of years. The problem is because some owners don't really want to give up control, this date can keep getting extended. And so we've kind of call this phenomenon the Queen Elizabeth syndrome. Even when they're capable heirs to the throne, some business owners are a little reluctant to give up power. And so, unfortunately, this kind of reluctance can hurt the business because it results in frustrated or confused successors, employees, or family members. And in fact, one study, successors identified the older generation's failure to let go as their number one problem. Next slide. This next slide shows a cartoon as one frustrated successor to be said, every time I get close to the end zone, Dad keeps moving the goalposts. And so, does this sound like any of the children that might be involved in the business? And, one reason that maybe the dad keeps moving the goalpost is because he, like many business owners, feels like that any power he gives to his children might be another nail in his coffin, or he also may just not be emotionally ready to do that yet. And so even if the owner is willing to let go, sometimes they're unable to. Next slide. Again, even if they want to let go, many owners are unable to step down just because there may be nobody to simply take their place. Maybe the kids are still too young to take over, or maybe there aren't any family members or key employees who are A, willing to be part of the business, or B, qualified to run the company. And so handing over the company to someone who's not able to manage it, especially when your income is dependent on the business' continued success, is one reason why 61% of retired entrepreneurs reacquire their formal positions within 18 months. So really think about it. Once you've retired, do you really want to come back into the business to rescue it, and take over the reins again? And so choosing that successor is really important. also helping groom them and make sure that they're ready to take the reins. Another quick story of a business that I worked with for over 12 years. It was a family-owned business. They're actually in the funeral industry. And so they're predominantly family-owned businesses. And the father has 6 kids. 2 of them are involved in the business. One of the sons was still young and just finishing up the schooling needed. And the other son was a little older and involved in the business, the operations. But we went through some of the planning. Some business succession planning was a key area we went through for him. And he decided to gift 1% ownership to his sons and make them formal owners. And then he created a buy-sell agreement with the sons and the boys. Unfortunately, several months after that, he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. And so through this process, he then began to train the boys. They were trained on the operations side of things, but they didn't really know much about the financials. And so we got the boys involved in understanding the financials a lot more. And then again, unfortunately, 8 months later, he passed away, and all the planning was tested. Fortunately, we had some life insurance that was in force and paid out to the boys so they could buy out mom and have the business, and also not put unneeded stress on the business to pay out mom over time. So the boys were able to purchase mom. The business is strong and thriving, and they're continuing to grow that business today. Next slide. So we've been talking about some of the financial, the emotional issues in letting go of your business, as well as some considerations for selecting and training a successor. I'm going to now turn it back over to Landon, who's going to spend the remainder of the workshop on another key aspect of transferring the business, namely choosing the appropriate transfer option. So, Landon?
All right. Thank you, Brett. And thanks for that story, the stories that you shared, because it really helps, put things into perspective as business owners that, you just never know when something's going to happen. So, you got to get the planning done while things are, in a good state. So thanks for sharing that.
You bet.
Next slide, please. All right. So it's impossible to talk about transferring your business, right? Your second succession planning priority without, talking about the tax consequences of the various transfer options. So achieving that third succession planning priority, minimizing the impact of taxes, that can certainly require doing some more complex, financial modeling of its own. Next slide, please. All right. So essentially, you've got 4 options when it comes to transferring the business, right? Sell it during your lifetime, sell it at your death, bequeath or gift it at death, or you can, gift it during your lifetime. So due to the nature of time here, try to get us out of here in about 5 to 7 minutes. I know we got started a couple of minutes late, so apologize for that, but I'm going to go through these very, very quickly, so bear with me here. So in a lot of cases, your choice is going to be driven, to a significant extent by your own, unique financial and your tax situation. So, let's start with selling the business during lifetime. And once you've, done some modeling there and you know that you can afford to sell it, then of course you're going to be presented with some decisions that you'll have to make. Next slide, please. All right. So sell during lifetime, right? So first, you got to figure out, when are you going to sell that? Is that something you want to get done now? Is that something that you want to get done in a number of years, or maybe it's at retirement? But you also have to take into consideration what happens if an unforeseen event happens, like a premature death or a disability. We've run into plenty of planning cases where you do some great planning, but as Mike Tyson says, a plan is great until you get punched in the face. So now, once you kind of identified when you want that to happen, then you need to identify, well, who is this going to be sold to, right? Is it going to be sold to family? Maybe they're in or outside of the business. Maybe you got business partners you want to sell it to. Or maybe the only person that you can get to buy your business is a competitor. And then also you got to identify, how is that going to actually be executed? Is the buyer going to come in and they're going to pay cash? Is it going to be done through some kind of an installment structure where they're paying you X amount of dollars every year over time? Or maybe it's executed through your buy-sell agreement through a cross-purchase or a stock redemption type of plan. So, the question is selling it during your lifetime, is that the right thing for you? Next slide, please. All right, second option for transferring the business is to defer the sale until after you passed away. And we'll talk a little bit about that here on the next slide, please. So here's just an image to kind of give you an idea of how this is executed. Typically it's going to be executed through a buy-sell agreement, right? So the stock of the decedent is sold to the active heirs. And then that, of course, is going to flow through to the estate. And based on the planning that you have done, that's going to determine how much is going to go to the IRS and how much is going to go to your named beneficiaries. Next slide, please. All right. So we found that while many of our clients come to us with existing agreements, they're often, outdated. And the key to an effective buy-sell agreement is that it's going to reflect what your current situation looks like, right? And so you're going to want to consider, right? Do you still have the right parties to the agreement? Is the buyer still committed to the purchase? To what extent will the seller or the seller's family be financially dependent on the buyer, or the future success of the business after the sale? So how do you decide, whether or not to wait, until you die to sell the business? All right, next slide, please. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about how some of the owners are unwilling to give up the control of the business. So if you're one of those owners who wants to die with your, business boots on, there's a few questions that you're going to have to ask yourself, right? Is keeping the business until I die necessary to provide me with the amount of control that I need or want? Is the funding sufficient to provide, survivorship income, pay taxes, and meet estate equalization objectives? And your answer to these questions can help give you some clarity if that might be the right transfer option for you. Next slide, please. So we examined selling the business during your life and after you passed away. So let's look at the first of our two gifting options, which is to gift or bequeath it at your passing. All right. Next slide, please. While most people think that the beneficiary of their estate is going to be their family, maybe with charity as a distant second, in reality, for a lot of business owners that we've seen and done planning for, there's going to be a third beneficiary of your hard work, and that's going to be good old Uncle Sam. So, in fact, without doing appropriate planning, we've seen several instances where the IRS actually, ends up becoming the largest beneficiary of your quote-unquote gift. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a quick image just to kind of show you an equal distribution and how it could potentially harm the business. So I'm going to just spend about 10 seconds here. So this slide essentially shows us that if we've got a business that's, say, worth, approximately $11 million, and as the owner or owners, pass the business along due to a passing, maybe, let's say you've got a child in the business, right? So you're going to pass the business to them. The business itself is worth about $4 million, and then there's another $4 million that might go to a couple of kids, and then Uncle Sam gets their share of about $2 million. So as you can see here, one child gets a business that's worth $4 million, while the other two kids might get half of $4 million or $2 million each. So you can see here that doing the proper planning ahead of time can certainly help to equal out that distribution and avoid any conflict for the children. Next slide, please. All right. So gifting it at death, right? So first you've got to consider, do I have the appropriate legal documents to properly execute this kind of transfer? Second, have you taken full advantage of all the appropriate tax relief and incentive provisions, as well as various gifting incentives? And third, do I have an adequate amount of life insurance, and is it properly structured, right? While life insurance is the solution everyone loves to hate, nonetheless, it's often the most cost-effective way to produce the cash that's needed to pay the taxes. This approach can be highly effective, but should not be implemented until you've developed a complete succession and estate plan showing if and how, this might fit into your situation. Next slide, please. The fourth option for transferring your business is to gift it during the lifetime. And let's look at the tax and financial advantages of lifetime gifting on the next slide, please. All right. So is gifting during life, is it such a great tax advantage? If it is, why doesn't everybody take advantage of it? So in our experience, people don't gift typically for three reasons: loss of financial security or control. Those are kind of 1 and 2 bundled together. And then also the need to pay the taxes now. Next slide, please. All right. So you should, number one, analyze the long-term financial and tax implications of each of these options. Determine the best way to equalize your estate without harming the business, and choose the transfer option that's going to be the right one for you. And the option that's right for you may not be the one that's right for the person sitting next to you or the other business owner in your mastermind group or somebody that you know. And, there is no one best option or solution. Don't let anybody convince you that there's one best way to transfer your business, because different people have different kinds of businesses, different family circumstances, different key employee circumstances, and certainly different capital requirements and tax situations. So we promise to get you out of here on time. So at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Brett for some final thoughts and talk about some next steps.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Landon. Next slide, please. So I know we've covered a ton of material in a really short period of time, and really it hasn't been an exhaustive list or super specific. But, I'd like to just take a minute, summarize some of the key points that we've covered today. So next slide, please. So if you remember basically nothing else about this workshop, remember that business succession planning should center around 3 key planning priorities: providing for your own financial security, transferring the business, and helping minimize the impact of taxes. And once you're confident you can move forward, then it's working with somebody that can help you through that process as well and do it to the best of ability. So really, where do you begin? If we go to the next slide, perhaps the best piece of advice is just like the old Nike motto, just do it. It applies more than just to exercise, but the fact is that there will always be demands on your time and a million tasks that require your attention. But at the same time, the only one who can plan for the succession of your business is you. You obviously considered succession planning to be a priority, or you wouldn't, be listening to this today. And I'd be remiss here if I didn't say again, you owe it to yourself to take the next step and get really the clarity on all of the objectives. What do you want to do with your business? Who do you want to replace you? When do you want to retire? What are your retirement goals? What is it going to take to meet those and sustain your required lifestyle? And so the best way to get this information is to really have some financial modeling done. If we go to the next slide, really, again, Landon and I are very grateful that we were asked to present today. And our value add is we want to offer the opportunity to give you an initial free, no obligation consultation to discuss your situation and really answer any questions and get more specific to your individual needs and questions. So we've put our information here. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions, or even to set up a time to discuss your specific situation if you want to. And again, we want to thank you for taking time to be on this call today, and thanks to Danica for coordinating, and we hope that you were able to take away something of value today. So thanks again.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us for the call today. And again, Brett and Landon's information is up on the slide right now. So feel free to reach out to them directly to get that consultation. It's a really awesome offer. I think there was some really great information that was shared today, and I want to thank you guys again so much for hosting this webinar today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And again, feel free to reach out to them directly. And just a reminder that Chamber U happens every Friday at 10 a.m. And next week, I hope you guys join us for a discussion on balancing work and continuing education with WGU Nevada. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. We'll see you next week. We'll see you next week.